Professors like Francis Fox Piven authored what is known as the Cloward-Piven strategy for bringing down capitalism through the welfare system, as I explained to you in Trickle Up Poverty. Sure enough, Piven was one of the speakers at the Occupy Wall Street demonstrations. Piven railed against the bankers not just as greedy thieves, but as cannibals, because they are eating their own, us. That kind of rhetoric, so typical of the leftists of the 1960s, is re-emerging today as the Obama administration looks on approvingly. It's the same Marxist propaganda that brought Russians to their knees nearly 100 years ago and led to 70 years of their being enslaved by the communist elite. It's the same political philosophy that killed 60 million Chinese under Mao's rule and that has led to the North Korean darkness today. What you hear from the demonstrators themselves gives you an idea of just how ignorant they are. I got warrants. I'm running from the law. I'm not even supposed to be here, but it's as good a spot as any to hide. On my third day, they'd smoked salmon with cream cheese. You know how much smoked salmon is a pound? $16. I eat better here than I do with my parents. General Electric's CEO and Obama job czar Jeffrey Immelt, the guy whose company pays no corporate taxes and who is moving 2 of his businesses to Red China, chimed in with this about the demonstrators. We have to be empathetic and understand that people are not feeling great. Brian Phillips belongs to NYC General Assembly, a group that has had a big part in the Occupy Wall Street demonstrations. He's clear about what he wants to see happen. My political goal is to overthrow the government. Warren Goldstein, chairman of the Department of History at the University of Harvard, shouted to the demonstrators, "You are fulfilling the words of the prophet Isaiah. You have thrown off the yoke. Occupy, occupy, occupy." The demonstrators, terminally obedient to the leftist professors who mentor them in the art of the free lunch, are cutting classes from their $50,000 a year elite colleges to defecate on cop cars and sit around in circles praising the likes of the real terrorists their professors have taught them to emulate. The Occupy Wall Street demonstrators have one important characteristic in common with Barack Obama and Adolf Hitler. They're blatantly anti-Semitic. Bard College, which has loaned out many of its students to the Occupy Wall Street protest, has made the International Solidarity Movement an official campus organization. The ISM's stated purpose is to take action in order to destroy Israel. One of Bard's largest contributors is George Soros, who donated $60 million to the anti-Semitic hate-mongers who run the school. Jewish Funds for Justice, JFFJ, is a communist socialist group funded by George Soros. JFFJ staged Occupy Yom Kippur demonstrations, the Jewish equivalent of OWS. The group's communications director had this to say about the Occupy Wall Street demonstrations. For many of us, social justice is where we find our Judaism. A JFFJ board member who teaches rabbinic literature at the American Jewish University praised the OWS movement in a piece he wrote for Soros's Center for American Progress. He talked about the anti-Semitic protesters as somehow representing a just society. The words of the protesters themselves echo their mentors' anti-Semitism. In Los Angeles, one local schoolteacher said this, "I think that the Zionist Jews who are running these big banks and our Federal Reserve, which is not run by the federal government, they need to be run out of this country." She lost her job as a result of her comments. Normally, those on the left aren't punished for being racists, but public uproar was so strong that the teacher had to be fired. I'm certain she'll be hired back, under the radar, in some other position after the uproar dies down. A New York protester had this to say, "A small ethnic group constitutes almost all of the hedge fund managers and bankers on Wall Street. They are all Jewish. There is a conspiracy in this country where Jews control the media, finances. They have pooled their money together in order to take control of America." I expect that out of anyone who has been brainwashed in the U.S. educational system. That includes Barack Obama. Obama stood by applauding the protesters, saying nothing against their blatant anti-Semitism. Jewish groups are speaking out against the president. The Emergency Committee for Israel released a video call for the president to take a stand against the demonstrators' anti-Jewish rhetoric and urging President Obama to take a stand against such hate-filled rhetoric. I've never understood how Jewish people could support this president and his anti-Semitic views. I call for the Jewish community to return to its senses and stand up against their own people who support this Israel-hating movement and our blatantly anti-Semitic president. When he finally did comment, here's what the president had to say. I think that the Occupy Wall Street movement, expresses the frustrations that the American people feel. It's not a surprise to me that the president failed to speak out against the anti-Semitic demonstrators. When he was speaking at the Congressional Black Caucus Awards banquet back in September 2011, he was comparing the tax rates paid by the rich and those who worked menial jobs for a living. He made what used to be known, when I was growing up, as a Freudian slip. He said, "If asking a billionaire to pay the same tax rate as a Jew, a janitor makes me a warrior for the working class, I have no problem with that." That's not an accident. It reflects something very disturbing to me in the president's way of looking at the world. His own anti-Semitism is creeping into the decisions he makes, the words he speaks. The government media complex is complicit in this dangerous anti-Semitism. CNN asked this question: would Jesus occupy Wall Street? Of course, when it's convenient for them, when turning to religions benefits their cause, the left is willing to invoke Jesus' name. They ask this question in order to make the point that Christians should support the rabble in the streets of U.S. cities. The first problem with the assumptions underlying the question is this. Jesus was a Jew, and Jews aren't welcome among the occupiers. Jesus would be pro-Israel. He'd also be anti-communist. He instructed his followers to care for their families, their neighbors, the poor, and the sick. He did not say that we should turn our responsibilities over to the government. When he confronted the money changers in the temple, he was not somehow striking out against banks, and he was not doing so on behalf of the masses. He was defending God's temple, which the money changers had taken over. Jesus would walk among the occupiers for one reason only, to point out to them that they were sinners, that rape, assault, bearing false witness, sloth, and coveting thy neighbor's possessions, all of which these occupiers are committing daily, are sins, and that they must be stopped. He wouldn't have cared at all about the occupiers' political causes. In fact, he would have railed against having his name co-opted by such a vain, self-centered, destructive mob for their godless cause. The OWS mobs would have assaulted and spat on Jesus if he had walked among them. For CNN to even imply otherwise is the height of hypocrisy. The ranking Democrat in the U.S. House, Representative Nancy Pelosi, Socialist Party, California, followed the president's approval of the mob behavior with this: I support the message. The president and the former speaker should be speaking out against what is really going on with this bunch of unwashed would-be radicals living off their parents. What they really want is to be able to live off the state for the rest of their lives. The Harvard Crimson newspaper gave space to a group called the Revolutionary Communist Party, a fringe group that still holds out for the same things that Bill Ayers, who wrote Obama's book Dreams from My Father, wanted in the 1960s. Here is some of what this group stands for: violent overthrow of the government, a separate region of the country for African Americans, the South, and Hispanics, the Southwest. Special elections in which only African Americans and Hispanics could vote would be held to decide the issue in the two regions. All people not of the appropriate race or ethnicity would be forced to relocate if they lived in the South or the Southwest. Prohibition of capitalism. Amnesty for all illegal aliens living in the United States, with the exception of capitalist enemies of the state.